added stress to an already uncomfortable situation.
Hello, Matt and Roger. Thank you for joining us for our final video submission of Ed 5070. Myself, Brendan, Maria, Taylor, Danika, and Sean will be presenting for you today.
Mr. Smith is a health and physical education teacher. He is very outgoing, loves to joke around with his students, and even volunteers his time to coach the varsity girls basketball team. Mr. Smith doesn't struggle much with any of the units that he teaches in health and physical education, with the exception of the safe sex, unplanned pregnancy, and STI unit that he has to teach to all of the grade 9 students in the school. He finds it uncomfortable, to say the least. Mr. Smith has PowerPoints that have been created by the local sexual health nurse that he uses to educate the grade 9 students on safe sex, unplanned pregnancy, and sexually transmitted infections, and the complications that they can cause both physically and emotionally. Mr. Smith knows how important it is to talk about this unit with his students, as it is sometimes the only education that they will receive on this topic. But no matter how you swing it, it's awkward for him. It's Monday morning, and Mr. Smith arrives at the high school knowing that he is going to start this unit today with his grade 9 health and physical education students. He teaches 4 grade 9 HPE classes throughout the day, and with COVID, the students have been split in half, so he knows he is going to have to teach each lesson plan 8 times in a row. Mr. Smith puts his PowerPoints from the sexual health nurse up on the smartboard and teaches accordingly all day. Although it is uncomfortable, the students are silent throughout the classes. They are speechless. They didn't know where to begin to ask questions. Mr. Smith does his best to navigate any confusion, curiosity, and does his best to convey the seriousness and importance of this information to the students. At the end of the day, Mr. Smith felt that his lessons achieved what he had set out to do. The students had more curiosity in this unit than any of the other previous units before. By 7 p.m. Monday night, Mr. Smith had already received 8 emails from parents, and by Tuesday at 6 p.m., he received another 10 emails. Parents are concerned that their children should not be taught this information in school. "This is my kid, and I will choose when the right time to talk to them about the birds and the bees is," wrote one parent. "My kid is way too young to be talking about sex," wrote another parent. Mr. Smith knows that this unit is a part of the New Brunswick curriculum, and it is an important unit for students to learn about, as high school is a time where students typically become sexually curious, and it is important to know what risks students are taking and how to prevent them to the best of their ability. Even though he explains this to the parents are still upset and don't see it that way. Mr. Smith is feeling defeated and is not looking forward to returning to work on Wednesday to carry on with this unit. He already felt uncomfortable discussing this unit with the students before the parents reached out to him, but now he feels even worse and feels like he's done something wrong. Mr. Smith informs the principal of the emails that he has received from parents regarding their concerns for the unit. The principal is on the same side as Mr. Smith in agreeing that this is an important topic to cover in this class and he should continue on as normal, and they will address the concerns together as they come in. It's Wednesday morning, and Mr. Smith carries on with the unit as planned because he knows this may be the only opportunity for these students to learn about unplanned pregnancy and sexually transmitted infection risks, regardless of what their parents believe is the right time. If he doesn't cover it now, it won't get covered for the rest of their high school time, as this is the only mandatory health and physical education class in high school.
The first big question that came to mind in relation to Mr. Smith's position in our case study was from week 9. To whom are teachers and learners responsible? Most importantly, teachers have a responsibility to their students to teach the given curriculum. This was prevalent in this case study as parents did not believe that Mr. Smith should be teaching their children information about sex ed. But despite the wishes of some parents, he returned to class that Wednesday to continue his teaching duties and fulfill his responsibility as a teacher. This being said, I also believe that teachers have a responsibility to parents to teach their children the curriculum in an unbiased and respectful manner. I could understand the backlash that Mr. Smith received if he had made inappropriate jokes or comments to the students during class, but in this case study, Mr. Smith was just doing his job in a suitable and professional manner. Lastly, just because some parents do not want their children to learn about sex ed this early does not mean that it's the same for all parents. Some students may never have the opportunity to learn about safe sex, STIs, or unplanned pregnancies outside of this class, and without this education, it could potentially have a negative effect on their health in the future. In week 9 of our course, we also read a textbook chapter that posed a question that could be asked when presented with the controversies of sex ed. Chapter 6 of our textbook addressed the question, should teachers teach students about controversial subjects? On page 113 of our textbook, it states that, as teachers, we may find ourselves in a quandary. Sensitive controversies reflect the larger debates that influence and inform our society. However, they may be difficult to negotiate and, moreover, may have significant repercussions from students, parents, the profession, and the broader community. So, in some cases, teachers are able to use their own discretion on specific controversial topics and choose how to professionally and fairly address them. But considering that Mr. Smith was strictly following the health curriculum, this isn't exactly the case for him. Further, in relation to our case study, we can ask, should controversial topics like sexual education be included in the curriculum? Though I spoke previously on the importance of sex ed for some students, page 116 in our textbook offers a more broad perspective that there are multiple constituencies that schools must serve. At least 3 constituencies or groups have a controlling interest in schools. First, the government has a legitimate interest in the development of its future democratic citizens. Second, schools act on behalf of parents, and at least part of their job is to respond to parental preference. And lastly, schools are thought to act on behalf of the children themselves. So, in turn, in relation to acting on behalf of parents, page 113 of the textbook also says that one might suggest not addressing controversial subtopics at all in the classroom, given that it can be a very difficult balancing act for the teacher. And one of the main reasons behind this was that there's little consensus that exists for how one should address a particular issue, given the nature of schools and that of addressing issues with children. Another reason that's stated is that parents have the right to raise their children in a particular way, not the state. So again, in the case of Mr. Smith, we ask, should he teach or continue to teach a controversial subject like sexual education? As mentioned in the previous slide, ultimately the answer is yes, as long as it's delivered in an unbiased and professional way. But there are multiple perspectives to be considered in this situation, and it will be addressed further in the legal portion of our presentation. So for now, I'm going to hand it over to Danika to touch a little bit more on parental involvement in the education system and how that relates to the topic in our case study.
In our case study, Mr. Smith receives messages from parents saying that they don't condone that their kids are learning about safe sex, unplanned parenthood, STIs, etc. in school. Parents are attempting to stop the teacher while he's teaching the unit and the class material. Some are saying that their kids are too young to be taught about those things, but it's important to remember that grade 9 is the only school year where students are taught this material. Based off of this, we think that our case study relates to our 12th week's reflection, where the textbook question is, what educational rights should parents and communities have over the teacher? Based on our textbook reading, we believe that parents are able to have a say on how something is taught, meaning the delivery from the teacher, but they shouldn't have a say on what is taught and if it's included in the curriculum. The Parent School Support Community Handbook, or PSSC, states that parents involved in this committee hold the role of addressing the broad issues related to the education of all students in the school with the goal of enhancing student learning. In this case, we do not believe that curricular material is included within the broad issues that parents should be addressing. With our case study, we were able to find some similarities to the case study Over the Rainbow. Similarly to the backlash received by Mr. Smith in our case study, the teacher in this case study was experiencing conflicts with some parents and community members over the fact that she was demonstrating her support for the LGBTQ I2S+ community by posting the Ally Pledge in her classroom. Parents of her students argued that the type of conversation that is brought up by this pledge is not age appropriate and that the students are not mature enough for this content. They also argued that provincial guidelines state that the primary responsibilities for sex education rest with the parents and not with the schools. In the Rainbow case study, parents had the ability to opt their children out of sensitive or controversial topics in their family life curriculum. Should this be an option for the health education curriculum in our case study as well? Although the conflicts with parents are similar in both case studies, in Mr. Smith's case, he is following his duties by teaching the designated health curriculum, and this may be the major difference between the two cases.
So now we're going to look at the legal perspective on this case study. And in terms of the legal aspect, we're going to be looking at 3 different legal documents in New Brunswick. The New Brunswick Education Act, Policy 202, and Policy 713. First, looking at the New Brunswick Education Act, Section 27 of the Education Act talks about the duties of a teacher employed in New Brunswick school. These duties include A, implementing the prescribed curriculum, and E, attending to the health and well-being of each pupil. In relation to this case study, Mr. Smith has the duty to implement the prescribed curriculum, and he's protected by the New Brunswick Education Act as a safe sex and STI unit is part of the curriculum that he's responsible to teach. He also has a responsibility to attend to the health and well-being of each pupil, and if he decides to not teach this unit, this could lead to his students not being properly educated and run into health issues in the future. In Section 13, it talks about the role of parents within the school system. It says, in support of the learning success of their child and the learning environment at the school, a parent is expected to communicate reasonably with school personnel employed at the school, and they must do this in a way that is in the best interest of the child and the school community. It also says that parents have a right to reasonable consultation with the pupil's teacher or with the principal at the school that their child attends with respect to the education of their child. It is not mentioned anywhere in this policy that parents have the right to dictate which curriculum should be taught to their children. It says that parents have a right to consult with school personnel regarding the child's education, but this must be done in a reasonable manner and should be in the best interest of the student. In this case, the best interest of the student would be for them to be properly educated on sexual education. Now looking at Policy 202, which focuses on substitute teachers, we pose the question, could a substitute teacher be expected to deliver this content? In Section 6.9 of this policy, it states that substitute teachers are expected to fulfill the same responsibilities, perform the same duties, and carry out the same teaching assignments as the teachers who they are replacing. Having a substitute teacher teach this content may pose a risk to the students as well as the school. Sexual education can be a very touchy subject, and it is important for students to be comfortable with their teacher and for the teacher to teach it in a respectful manner. If a substitute teacher gets put into a classroom where they must teach sex ed and they are unprepared for it, this can make for a very uncomfortable situation for everyone involved. Also, the school and the classroom teacher could receive backlash if the substitute teacher makes inappropriate comments while they are teaching this unit due to inexperience.
We believe that Policy 713, where it speaks about sexual orientation and gender identity, would fit well into our case study about Mr. Smith. Reasons for this are because it creates inclusion for everybody, it has safe environments created for the students at the school, and we believe that looking at specific sections, one key place that we can look at is Section 5.3 that says it is important that all students have a sense of belonging and connection to their school and environment. Students should feel that they are supported by school personnel. So we believe that in this case, Mr. Smith needs to make it clear that the students have a sense of belonging no matter the topic that they're talking about. So in this case, in PDCP, talking about sexual orientation and reproduction, having safe sex, those topics, they should feel safe and understand how it could impact them, even if it's not something that they believe would be something they'd be interested in. The other section would be 6.1.6. EECD, school districts, and school personnel will ensure that classroom materials and activities contain positive and accurate information related to sexual orientation and gender identities. So we believe that it is important for Mr. Smith to be clear to the students that all individuals can be affected by sexually transmitted infections regardless of sexual orientation. So in this case, parents might feel that their student would not apply to this information, but there are topics that Mr. Smith will have to cover in his class that no matter of orientation and gender identity, it will relate to them, and therefore we need to follow these policies to ensure a safe environment for these students.
Through our discussion based on the 2 big questions of the week, as well as Chapter 6 and Policies 202 and 713, Mr. Smith could send an email to the parents prior to starting the unit informing them that he will be starting the Safe Sex, Unplanned Pregnancy, and STI unit. He could also attach the PowerPoint slides to the email that he will be sending to the parents with the slides that he will be using to be completely transparent with them about what is being covered. Although Mr. Smith is covering sensitive material that the parents may not advocate for, He is not encouraging his students to be sexually active. He is merely educating the students on factual information regarding safe sex, unplanned pregnancies, and STIs. Because Mr. Smith is covering the material appropriately, he should continue to teach the unit as he has a duty to teach the curriculum to the students. In the event that a supply teacher were to come in, Mr. Smith should have a backup lesson plan available for the supply teacher to teach, due to the fact that this material is of sensitive nature, and Mr. Smith should want to be very careful that the material is conveyed and taught in an appropriate manner. The only way to be 100% certain that this material is covered to his standards is to teach the material himself. Mr. Smith should also be certain to take on Policy 713 into consideration when planning his lessons to ensure that he is addressing all members of his classes and not just the students who identify as male or female or who are attracted to the opposite gender. Specifically when talking about STIs, everyone can be affected by them, so he should be certain to also convey this in his lessons. His lessons should be inclusive of everyone, regardless of the unit. In conclusion, we believe that Mr. Smith is put into a tough position when the parents are against the curriculum. Mr. Smith has the duty to teach the curriculum as intended, just as he has demonstrated, but the added stress from parental concerns increases the difficulty of his job when presenting this unit to the students. It is worth noting that we did discuss the possibility of would these same concerns happen if it was a female teacher teaching the unit? Would parents feel more at ease over that and less likely to complain? Would it make a difference? We didn't dive much further into the discussion beyond this, but thought it could be an interesting discussion to continue further. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to our case study and presentation today.